So, if you'd like to introduce yourself, your name and age and what happened.
I'm Henry Haynes, I'm 21, and my dog of 12 years died in front of me. So we got her when I was 7 from a farm in Worcester, and as a puppy, and just brought her back, and I had her throughout my whole school career almost. So we grew up at the same time, basically. Her from puppy, me to, like, teenager.
And during these years, did you really have a strong bond with this?
Well, yeah, obviously. I mean, she was the most loving dog you could ever hope for. She was an incredibly gentle, loving dog. We had other dogs at the time, but we had to get one away because there was an incident where this small dog bit Bridie, and that kind of drew us closer because when you're taking care of an animal that's utterly dependent on you, you can't help but bond at the heartstrings, as my mother would say. And yeah, everyone was close to her in the family.
So you had her for 12 years.
Mm-hmm.
So how old were you when she died?
I was 19. Well, it decimated the family emotionally, pretty much. I mean, she'd been ill for about a month before she died. She was always very timid and everything, but then she had started having heart problems, like palpitations and stuff. And so we were taking her back and forth to the vets. There was an incident where my mum took her to the vets and she literally fainted. The dog fainted, just keeled over backwards. My mum had to run in and ask for help. So it was you could kind of tell that it was getting close to the end, but then it was always a shock when it does happen with a pet. I mean, what actually happened was that my mum came and woke me up on like a Saturday morning saying that they were going to take Bridie to the vets and that I should come downstairs and say goodbye because they don't think that she's coming back. So I was completely out of the blue because I had just woken up, and B, you're being told that your dog is probably not going to come back from the vets. But I went downstairs to say goodbye and she was on the sofa, and you could tell that she wasn't all there. I mean, her eyes were open, but she was having trouble breathing and shaking and everything. So we said goodbye, and my parents were rushing about, and my brother was there as well. I was 19, so he would have been 24 at the time. And everybody was crying. I apparently wasn't. I don't really remember exact feelings, but Bridie was there, and I said goodbye, and then she stopped breathing. She literally just stopped. Her eyes were still open, but everybody was rushing about. I told my mum, who was just walking past, that I think she's gone. And my mum looked and she was so busy that she said, no, her eyes are open, she's fine. And I had to literally stop my mum and explain that the dog wasn't breathing anymore. And then everybody fell apart and they were crying and stuff. And I wrapped her up in a blanket and carried her out and put her in the boot of the car for my parents to take her to the vets to get rid of. And then they drove away, and then everything kind of sunk in, as it were. So everybody, for the next few days, they were just an emotional wreck. My mum, there's a story she tells where she was listening to, I can't remember the name of the song, Smile or something by Harry Connick Jr. And she just, on the way to work, would burst out crying, and she'd get in and her workmates would patch her up. So it's awful because you're used to having this constant presence padding around after you for 12 years and then it's gone. I think the biggest persuader almost into getting another dog is just how unnatural it feels without a dog. I mean, I'm 21 and I've never known life without a dog. The longest time that there has been without a dog in the house, other than being at university, was after Bridie died, and that was about 3 or 4 weeks. And it's just so unnatural. I mean, you're used to this wondering where the dog is wherever you are. You can just think, oh, hang on, where's the dog? And call out, and this thing will come padding in. And we were looking around at the dogs. We went to rescue shelters and stuff, went to the Dogs Trust, but then we just took wasn't even planned. We went to Birmingham Dog Pound, the city dog pound, just when we were in Birmingham. And we were looking around, and it was just a complete shock to see, because you go to the Dogs Trust and everything, and it's all bright, it's all clean, the dogs have these quite big runs, and they're glass fronted and you can see them. But then you go to Birmingham Dog Pound and it's over 3 floors and it's almost like split into prison blocks. There are these big cages, and the overwhelming dog breed that was there was Staffordshire Bull Terrier, which has such bad press or whatever. But we were looking at all these dogs and we picked out a couple that we might be interested in seeing. There was one which was this small black terrier, and I can't remember what the other one was. But then we couldn't find my dad, and we went up to find him, and he was on the top floor, and on the very last cage he was just kneeling down in front of this dog, and it was Maisie. She wasn't called Maisie, she didn't have a name at this point. It was just like 118, I think, was the name of her number of her cage. But she was this small, scrappy little thing that was so skinny you couldn't even tell really what kind of dog she was apart from this enormous head. And she was jumping around. She was so pleased that people were looking there, but she was completely silent. And then we asked one of the kennel people if we could have a look at her, and she was beside herself with excitement just to be played with. So there was no way we weren't taking her home. Initially, I mean, I remember in the dog pound, when after we'd seen her, I texted my brother saying, "We're thinking of adopting a Staffordshire Bull Terrier. Do you have a problem with that? Or is that something you'd be worried about?" And he was just a bit apprehensive about the breed. I mean, I think we all were, but we literally could not have been more wrong. I mean, there's bad stigma about the dogs, but then it's not even close to being the dog's fault. But Maisie had been through such a tough time before we got her. I think she was 15 months when we got her. So she had already been mistreated. She was literally picked up by the dog warden on the streets of Birmingham. She had rope burn around her neck from where she'd been tied up. She had scars on her head, and most horrendously, she has scars on her belly from bite marks from other dogs. And so she'd been used or tried to use for fighting, but clearly she rolled over and didn't want to fight. And that is, with the majority of these dogs, that's the natural instinct. They are boisterous, and because they're so heavy, because they're so strong, when they play with other dogs, with people, they play hard. But their size is, they think that they're a lapdog. They are odd-looking dogs when you first get them, but then they completely change what you think about a dog, what you think a dog should be. I mean, when we had Bridie, I thought a dog would be this tall, sleek-looking thing that lopes along at the end of the lead. We got Maisie, and my views on dogs have completely changed. I used to think that I was a renowned dog lover, but then I hesitated. I balked at the idea of getting a Staffordshire Bull Terrier for a moment, and I'm horrified at myself that I did, because now all these dogs that I thought looked dangerous or looked scary, I find myself drawn to. I mean, I would very happily get a Staffordshire Bull Terrier. I'd very happily get like a Rottweiler or a Doberman. They are all slightly intimidating looking dogs, but then once you've known one, you know that it just wants to please you, that it just wants to be loved. And I couldn't think about getting a puppy from a puppy farm, or just because it's a puppy. I would feel let down every time I walk past a dog pound or something. I feel like I made the wrong choice. Get to know the dog, and it will be life-changing. You'll find your family dog, or man's best friend. You'll find man's best friend.